Our top story, Iran's nuclear chief has condemned the latest incident at its Natanz uranium enrichment facility as an act of nuclear terrorism. Ali Akbar Salehi said the futile and desperate enemy move was aimed at blocking Iran's eye-catching nuclear progress. He called on the international community and the International Atomic Energy Agency to respond to the move. The head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran said the country reserves the right to take action against the masterminds, perpetrators and conspirators. On Sunday, Iran said the electricity distribution network of the Natanz facility had been affected in an incident. Israeli media have said the Mossad spy agency carried out a cyber attack against the facility. Daniel Kovalik is an international lawyer joining us out of Pittsburgh, and Romero Funes is a political analyst from Los Angeles. Gentlemen, welcome. Daniel, we've got an act of terrorism here. Despite that, we haven't really seen any response from the international community. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think first they're probably waiting to see if someone is going to take ownership of that attack. But even when that happens, and I have my own suspicions who that might be, I'm afraid that the international community will not respond in a proper way, and that is I doubt if they'll condemn the attack. This follows, of course, on the heels of the breakdown in the recent talks over the U.S. rejoining the nuclear deal with Iran. I suspect it may relate to that, and so I think you'll have a muted response from the West.
Romero, do we have a case where Israel doesn't want Iran to advance in its nuclear capacities, nuclear capabilities, or in any other field, despite the fact, with regards to its nuclear program, every intelligence agency in the world has admitted that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful, in addition to the UN nuclear watchdog?
That's exactly right. I think the timing, Dan made a great point of pointing out the timing of this situation. We're at a moment where the US and Iran are possibly back at the bargaining table with the JCPOA, with the nuclear deal. Iran is stronger than ever, developing, trading with Russia, trading with China, trading with Venezuela, lifting millions of people out of poverty, using nuclear technology not for violence, not for war, but for renewable energy, for peaceful development. And that scares Israel. That scares the countries that support these imperialist attacks against Iran, because any form of independence by Iran from the West, from Israel, is a threat to their financial interests, to their defense. And I think that this is 100% connected to Israel and the West's destabilization campaign against Iran. The timing is impeccable. I mean, we're talking about a time when Iran has more allies around the world than Israel does. Israel doesn't even have as much support from the US as it once did under Donald Trump, who was openly and explicitly very pro-Likud, pro-Netanyahu, pro-far-right Zionist. So I think the timing says it all. This is an attempt by Israel and the Western powers to destabilize Iran and once again portray it as some sort of violent actor or aggressor, when it is doing this only for peace, development, and prosperity.
Okay, well, on that note, let me bring Daniel back in. Daniel, just following up on what Romero was alluding to there is a school of thought that after the Trump administration, during the Biden administration, that Israel is committing acts of terrorism in an attempt to, with or without US consent, in an attempt to drag the United States into a war with Iran or a war with Iraq, for example. What do you make of that?
No, I think that's a big concern. I mean, I think Israel has barely concealed its intentions in this regard. It's made it clear that if the U.S. does not back Israel in its conflict with Iran, that it might just go it alone. But full well knowing that if a real conflict broke out, the U.S. would back it up. And so I think they're testing the waters to see if that is the case, and hoping to provoke Iran into doing something rash that would, in the eyes of some, justify retaliation. I think that is what we're seeing right now.
Right. And Romero, such an incident once again raises the eyebrows towards the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They have inspectors on the ground. They have access to Iranian nuclear facilities, and there have been accusations labeled against them in the past. Do you see any potential link between the agency and the perpetrators of this act of terrorism?
I think part of the role of these international agencies, not just the IAEA, but other international bodies such as the UN and other institutions that are dominated by the West, is to give the semblance, the appearance of objectivity. In Western philosophy, there's this idea perpetrated that institutions can be neutral, can be objective, can be unpartisan. And what we've seen throughout history is that this is extremely incorrect. Every international institution like the IAEA, like the UN, is tilted in the favor, in the balance of the Western imperialist powers like the US, like the European Union. I mean, just pointing out the fact that Israel has a huge nuclear arsenal, the US being the only country that has dropped 2 nuclear bombs in the world, and these countries have not been sought after or have not been penalized for their crimes around the world. And also look at the double standard when it comes to the Saudi attacks against Yemen, the war against Palestine. These are war crimes that are never talked about by these supposedly objective international bodies. And so while I'm not necessarily sure what the IAEA's role is in this latest terrorist attack, what I can be certain of is the fact that we shouldn't rely on these international bodies to say the truth, because a lot of times their role, their purpose is to give the semblance, the appearance of being objective, of being neutral, of being nonpartisan, when in reality we know that oftentimes they're controlled and dominated by the same perpetrators of war crimes like the United States and Israel.
And Daniel, we've got a minute left, so I'll give you the last word. Iran says it has the right to take action, reserves the right to take action against the masterminds of this attack.
Well, of course it does. I mean, this is a clear case that would represent self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, because they have been subject to an armed attack. They can do what they need to do to protect themselves from any further armed attacks. No one would seriously deny them that right. And they have shown, certainly in the last year especially, that they are very calculated and very modest in their responses to these types of provocations. They have been very responsible in their responses, and I expect they will continue to be.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. Let's thank our guests for joining us in this extensive coverage. Daniel Kovalik is an international lawyer from Pittsburgh, and Romero Funes, a political analyst, joining us out of Los Angeles.